This PowerPoint gives some initial information about Chapter 2 for Wardhaughch that will help fill in some ideas that are kind of missing that I would normally lecture on, and also to clarify different concepts. First of all, there are many definitions given on that first page about what a variety is. And so I've chosen the one that's close to the bottom of the first page, a describable set of linguistic speech patterns usually associated with a specific group or geographic area. So for example, if we're talking about Japanese, then we can describe the speech patterns of the Japanese language, and generally we can say that it's found in the Japanese islands, but also areas of New York and San Francisco. Vernacular, or the vernacular, found on page 24, refers to just local, everyday street language, the kind of language used by the common person in a given area. There's a million definitions for the word language, but we'll talk about language in terms of kind of linguistic norms, that is, patterns accepted by a group in a certain area. And those patterns, if we're talking about language, are not mutually intelligible to people who speak another language. In other words, people who speak another language A, cannot understand the language of speakers of language B. So that's what we mean by mutually intelligible, is that they could understand, but if it's a different language, it's not mutually intelligible. One thing to remember before we proceed is that the concepts, the words, the ideas behind language and ethnicity are not equivalents. They're not the same thing. So, for example, someone could consider themselves a Chinese American, that's their ethnicity, the group with which they identify, but their language might be English. Or someone could consider themselves a Navajo Indian, but they might not speak Navajo, they might speak English, etc. So it's possible that somebody who looks white but speaks Lakota Sioux, which is an Indian language, might consider themselves to be Native American and not kind of a mainstream American. So ethnicity refers to the group to which you identify. Language is that code or norm that you speak. They're not the same thing. We said that a language A is not understood by language B to be considered separate languages, but a dialect is a variety of language A that is understood by a group that speaks another variety of the same language. So we say dialects are mutually intelligible. That is, speakers in one region can understand the variety spoken by speakers in another region. So for example, in the United States, we have New England dialect, we have Midland dialect, spoken kind of around Philadelphia in the middle part of the country, and we also have Southern dialect. All those dialects differ in some way, but speakers of the different dialects can generally understand speakers of another dialect. So they're said to be mutually intelligible. Okay, so when we use those definitions of intelligible and not mutually intelligible, there are certain exceptions to that definition. There are lots of exceptions covered between 26 and 29, you'll be filling out a worksheet that deals with those exceptions and ask you to describe what they are. I can give one example, which is mentioned there, Hindi and Urdu exception. Here, this violates our definition of language and dialect because the speakers of Hindi and Urdu claim that they speak different languages, and yet they can understand each other, so they are mutually intelligible. The reasons that they claim that they're different languages have nothing to do with linguistics, but everything to do with politics and religion and history. So generally, Hindi speakers, this particular dialect, live in India, and they have a different religion, which is they're Hindus. Those who speak Urdu, another dialect, tend to have moved to Pakistan, and they tend to be Muslim. And the Muslims and the Hindis do not get along, so claiming that's a different language is just another way to separate themselves. Also, the written script is different for these two different languages, so that's another way that they try to kind of separate themselves. But it is an exception to our language dialect definition. So there's standard language is a term that's hard to get a hold of, and rather than try to define what a standard language is, it's much more effective to talk about it in terms of a functional definition, what standard languages are used for and where they're found. So that's the approach that we'll take. Okay. And your worksheet gives you several examples of functional definition and asks you to fill in some other